he didn't take care of his health at all, which is
sad.
Yeah,
especially with all the women in his life, the wives, the daughters. He had a lot of women in his life.
Yeah, but maybe they had the same proclivities. I'm afraid he didn't have around him the right people.
Welcome to Life's Third Act, an enlightening look at estate planning, retirement, and beyond.
Welcome to another episode of Life's Third Act. This week we're going to talk about, in many ways, I guess I would say a rock and roll icon.
Definitely.
There's nobody that does not know the name Jerry Garcia. In other words, not just Grateful Dead, which of course everyone knows that name, but I would go further than that. Everybody knows the name Jerry Garcia.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he's an ice cream.
There you go. Well, that's one source of his fame, his ties. But Jerry Garcia achieved this sort of fame, though, without any conscious effort to be a solo celebrity. Many people, they individually push themselves in the industry. They start out with a group, and then over time, they become an individual star, either within the group or the group is renamed, for example, like Tony Orlando and Dawn. That's a terrible example. Give me another example.
Captain and Tennille?
No.
Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath.
There you go.
Yeah. That's a good example. And also Lionel Richie. I think it started out that as just the Commodores, I believe.
Yes.
There's the Diana Ross thing where so many groups, in other words, where you come to know this single figure in the group, it's by a conscious effort or decision. And that never really happened with Grateful Dead. Yet we all know Jerry Garcia. He was just a memorable persona.
Yeah, definitely a character, that's for sure.
A character, definitely. If you look up a character in the dictionary, you got to it has to include this guy. Because he was fun, he was unself-censored, meaning that you could count on spontaneity from him in any sort of interview.
Resembled Santa Claus.
Well, he had this jovial demeanor too, which didn't hurt.
Love him.
Yeah. So anyway, we thought it would be interesting to talk about his estate plan, and many of you are thinking Jerry Garcia and plan do not seem to come together, but to some extent you're true. So you might predict that he's not going to be a role model for how to do estate planning. But I'll say this, he's not the worst role model regarding, what to do or not to do in estate planning. He really, he was a guy whose life was, I think I could say, safely characterized by good intentions. And I think that with estate planning too, he had some concern about those things, but I think like many things in his life, with the exception perhaps of music, I don't think he worried a great deal about it at all. And maybe he didn't worry about music either. He seemed to have a very good time.
I think a lot of things came to him naturally.
They did. I mean, he had a good life. And I guess that's where we'll start. Those of you who watch this show a lot, that we don't take on the task to be biographers. That's not our expertise. Our expertise relates to the estate planning, et cetera. But we do feel that we can't just plunge into the estate planning without talking a little bit about the life and whatnot, and kind of set the stage in some way specifically for our topic. So that is the way we'll proceed today. And also I want to mention, I encourage you, give us some comments. Comments help us. I'm impressed with the fact that we have the number of subscribers we do, so we thank you, and we hope we continue to earn your attention periodically for these shows. But meanwhile, we ask that you do give us a like. We certainly, likes are most important, but also give us your comments. Let us know what you think, and we do look at those. So it's not as if when you make a comment, it's not read and may in fact have influence on what we do in the future. So do that if you will. Anyway, so let's start then with Jerry's life. Where was he born?
He was born in San Francisco, California.
Now, why am I not surprised at that?
He's always been a free spirit, right? But he was born in 1942. And actually, when he was a little boy, his finger got cut off in a wood chipping accident.
Which finger?
I believe it was the pointer finger, I believe. And,
which hand?
I think it's his right hand because, he's a guitar player, so you would think that would have affected things. but it did not.
I guess not as bad as if
depending
it
on
were the other. Yeah.
But it was, not the whole hand, thank goodness, just the finger.
Yeah.
But he, was able to play the guitar. He was actually given an accordion, and he was pretty disappointed in that and traded it in for the guitar. So that was where he wanted. That's what he wanted to play.
That was a good judgment call.
I think so. So as he and his brother, he did come from a musical background. I believe his parents. His dad was a jazz musician who played woodwinds, the clarinet, and sadly he did lose his dad at a young age. His dad passed on a fishing trip. So he lost his dad.
And Garcia was there?
I don't know if he was there or not, but it was a fishing trip. Jerry was a young boy, and that's when he lost his dad. And then they ended up moving in with the grandparents for several years, he and his brother. So his brother was, I believe, older than him. And so they just, lived with grandparents and their mom, and, life went on. He went to his third grade teacher, who encouraged him to continue with music, his artistic abilities. So he was also into art. And I know that as we talk further about his life, that's some of the things that was left behind that's worth some money, some of his artwork. So, but he was very artistic. He loved rock and roll and blues. He was a big fan of Chuck Berry. So he influenced him, as well as Ray Charles, B.B. King, and others. And like I said, he had received that accordion but complained about it. So it was his guitar all the way, electric guitar. And he enlisted in the U.S. Army for a little while too, but he was actually discharged after only a few months because lack of stability to the military lifestyle. So yeah, that California free spirit got in the way of the military for sure.
It was not a dishonorable discharge.
No,
though.
it was just a discharge.
But they quickly concluded that he was not fit for Army life.
Nope. It's not an easy life, that's for sure.
So he was somebody who really was, I think, destined for the arts. Mm-hmm. I mean, he had this family link with the arts. I mean, his dad.
Yes.
But he was somebody that I think you couldn't be around long before you start thinking, this person has an aesthetic sort of worldview.
That
in
special
many ways.
quality, yes.
Yeah. But it's funny that it extended beyond just music, because I've seen some of the art, his painting and whatnot. It was really incredible.
Well, there for a while, didn't they have the Jerry Garcia ties? I can't remember what's.
I don't know who he did the contract with, but
yeah.
that was big, the Garcia ties, and that was mainly, I guess, in the 90s the ties were big. So I mean, they're very popular, and I'm sure that they probably have extra value now.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were the result of his own designs. But you know what? What's interesting is that his devotion to the guitar, and my impression, and I play guitar, not particularly well, but I play guitar. But I do like to read about and study about guitarists. And my impression, and I'm going to offend some of the guitarists out there, because many would regard Jerry Garcia as...
He was one of the best. I mean, he was ranked number 13 in Rolling Stone.
Yeah, that definition, it's a tough definition. And there's no question he was great in some sense of the word. And I don't know exactly what sense that is, but I can see where he would make a list of excellent guitarists and maybe a list of the best. I wouldn't have put him on the best, but it doesn't mean that I'm diminishing my admiration for him. I mean, he was totally devoted to his instrument, and he even started out with a bluegrass group. And his original intention, he started with banjo in terms of a string instrument. He was first serious about the banjo before he was serious about the guitar. And he was very good at banjo. And he really made an effort to succeed in that genre of music, like a Billy Strings. He wanted to be, and he would have made a mark if he had stayed just in bluegrass music. Now we have this new grass. He would have, I'm sure, he would have made a mark.
Yeah, he would excel in whatever he did musically.
He would have, because he'd have done something very inventive. He'd have been on the cutting edge of this progressive bluegrass. But I never saw him as a great technical player. I guess that's what I'm saying. I didn't see him as being just in the very top echelon, which I admit that's a very esoteric sort of tier where you have people like Clapton and Bonamassa and people like that. So I didn't see him so much in that tier, but you can't help but really admire him as an instrumentalist because he was so devoted, and he even continued to play bluegrass. There was a group, some of you watching who may follow him more closely know the groups he played with, but he did continue to play on the side with some bluegrass groups, and he continued to love bluegrass, and he was just so totally devoted to guitar that it was a pleasure to watch him play. And he had his own style. You can definitely don't need a visual to know when he's playing. You can listen to his style of picking or his style of doing runs. It's kind of unique.
Well, I read somewhere where he never wanted it to sound the same twice.
Yeah,
like
well,
every
it never
time
did.
he was always playing it differently, you know?
That was a blessing and a curse for his group. Grateful Dead, they never could seem to have that occasion when they all come together when they're in a studio.
That's why the bootlegs were so popular, because every show was different.
They were, and different, and also in terms of quality too. And Jerry Garcia would be the first to admit, he said, we had some bad shows. And he said, but what really makes it worth it is those times when we all come together at those concerts. And it's not every concert. but there are those where they really come together. As you said, Justin, those bootlegs, that's better than the studio. They never seem to succeed at the single moments when it matters. Like that would seem to be when you're making a recording and something like Woodstock. Woodstock was the launch of many careers in music. I mean, there are a number of Hendrix, certainly. I mean, Woodstock launched Hendrix fame, really, even though he died not long thereafter. And Woodstock was hugely beneficial to so many people or groups, but some reason, and probably something to do with drugs. But Grateful
Woodstock.
Dead,
Yeah.
Jerry Garcia would have said we were awful there. I mean, he would concede that was one of their worst shows, but some of it was technical, having to do with the sound equipment stuff. But somehow the Rolling Stones, and there is a parallel between the Rolling Stones and the Grateful Dead, incidentally. They're both kind of loose,
very
loose, but nothing like Grateful Dead. But so Grateful Dead, though, they couldn't seem to be their best when they need to be on those occasions, in studios most notoriously. So anyway, they liked live albums, and they gave permission to people who attended their shows to record, which is unusual. Yeah. I mean, it's totally contrary to practices in the capitalist world of music, and the world of music is capitalist. Let me tell you.
You have shows now where they will collect your phone and put it in a bag.
I've been to those shows.
It's nuts.
Yeah, I've been to those shows.
Good thing I'm not a doctor.
Oddly enough, one of those shows was a Bob Dylan show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Bob Dylan, he doesn't want his stuff sold without his getting a royalty, and I don't begrudge that. But Grateful Dead was different.
Yeah.
And this will tie in with estate planning. So let's move along here quickly.
Okay.
The band stayed together. He stayed with the band to the end.
Yes, he sure did.
And
he did those side jobs too, but he was always with them. Mm-hmm.
And they had just come off a tour, I think, when he went back in for drug treatment, resulting in the time when he died. He was age 53. 53.
Which just seems, I feel bad saying this, but I thought he was so much older. And I guess that just shows you what drugs can do. He was older looking than 53.
Well, he did look older than 53. That's true. And he didn't make any effort to improve that tendency. So I am surprised too. 53. That's no reason that we should have lost that guy at that age.
Way too young.
His diabetes, though, was type 2 diabetes, I imagine.
Yeah, he had the diabetes. He had a couple situations going on. I mean, he was even in a coma for a while, which a 5-day diabetic coma back in 1986. And when he, got out of that coma, he had to relearn how to play the guitar as well as walking. Like a lot of simple things he had to relearn after that. Like you're saying, the devotion to the guitar.
Yeah, and that happened in his home, didn't it?
I'm not sure where that happened.
He didn't get proper attention.
Yeah.
And take the insulin and whatnot. So he never took care of himself. He had a long history of drug addiction, which I guess probably went back to the very early days.
Yeah, the 60s for sure. His diet, I've heard, wasn't too good either. The hot dogs and milkshakes were one of his favorite combos, so not good.
And he smoked cigarettes, too. Yeah. I don't know. Jerry was laid back and he didn't worry about much, but there are consequences for that. It's endearing. We all know those people. And it is endearing, and they're, in many ways, more fun to be around.
Yes.
But I don't think you want to be that person.
Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, like we were talking about the California spirit, sometimes that's veganism and all healthy eating, love, peace, and all that, But it's a shame because he had so much probably still to give in the world of music. To have passed at 53 and we hear the story over and over again that drugs get him. It's that lifestyle and even the multiple wives and, relationships that didn't work.
But, I think it was Paul McCartney that said, you show me a successful musician and I'll show you a son of a bitch, I think was the language he used, pardon me. But his point was, and he said, in the Beatles, he said we were the worst SOBs, meaning that you don't just stumble into fame and you don't stumble into success over time. Even in the sort of messy success of the Grateful Dead, it still was success and fame and continuity and longevity. And that doesn't happen just, without somebody insisting on control. You just can't have, for example, a bunch of hippies getting together who have musical talent, which some people imagine this is what Grateful Dead was a bunch of very talented hippie musicians. They get together and just make music and it continues to exist and
it caught on.
And succeed over decades. That just can't be. And same thing for the Rolling Stones. You have one and often more than one, but maybe more often just one. But you have at least one person who really insists on getting it right in the ways at least that they're concerned about. Now, it turns out that Jerry Garcia didn't believe getting it right meant that you had to, do every show the same way you did the previous show. You had every performance of a song had to be the same way. That wasn't Jerry's goal.
Not at all.
Unlike the Eagles, for example. I mean, Don Henley, was very despotic in saying, this is what we will do. We play it. People come to hear the song that they heard and loved on the radio.
All the hits.
and that's what we're giving them exactly the way it was recorded. So that was the Eagles' approach to concerts, and as far as I know, it continued to be later. But with Grateful Dead, here's a story that will tell you how, Jerry could be very serious about the music side of what they did. I guess it was Phil Lesh, I think was his name. Anyway, he was a younger member of the group at the time, maybe the youngest, and he had just started playing with the group. He had met Jerry at a party or something in San Francisco, and really looked up to him. And he was, I think, several years younger, but he wanted to be a member of the group. And turns out he had classical music training, and so was very qualified to play in the group. And Jerry agreed to take him in. So sometime later, they were all getting stoned and whatnot in the shows. It's another perfectionism that was not that didn't haunt Jerry Garcia, meaning that was not an area he was as concerned about, obviously. Yeah. But this guy was taking LSD. Phil told this story later. He was taking LSD during a concert, and he, at one point, as anybody can imagine, even if you haven't taken LSD, is that he just kind of looked off and, was soaking in where he was, even though he was on the stage and there was a concert. And I think he was playing bass at the time. And he was soaking it up and enjoying it, and just stopped playing, and for a while, and the rest of that song maybe or whatever. Anyway, he said that he got off the stage, and he said that Jerry Garcia grabbed him and shook him and may have even struck him. I remember when I was reading this, I thought, wow, is that Jerry Garcia? But he said, when you're on stage, you play. He said, don't you ever not play. And he was just, very belligerent, totally contrast to the happy hippie image. But that, you have to realize that had to be a side of Jerry Garcia or this band would not have worked. I mean, he did insist on some things being, there were things that he thought had to happen, and he insisted on them happening. Now, he wasn't the perfectionist in the same way that a Don Henley was. Henley was, more comprehensive, but the things that Jerry thought were essential, and most of it had to do with the things on stage, he was adamant. And I like to make that point so that I think it's a very important point to keep in mind about that's true of rock bands and it's true of pretty much any group activity is, from the outside it may look like it's a lot of fun and it's all parties and games and that this includes even mountain climbing or anything you think how that it would just be a great thing. But if you get on the inside of it, it may be a great thing. But you get on the inside of it, and if it's a group involved, you have somebody who is insisting on things be done right. It's just not human nature for things to just happen in a wondrous way spontaneously.
Yeah, no.
And
there's rhyme and reason to the madness.
We had talked about with James Brown, he got angry at people for not shining their shoes. They're like the trumpet players and stuff.
Yeah. James Brown, he's another example. He would glare at somebody on stage if their dress or attire was off at all. So I think you find this, and of course with Rolling Stones, we know that Mick Jagger, to some extent you can say Keith Richards, but I think it's really more Mick Jagger Mick and Keith both have strong personalities, but I think Mick Jagger was the guy who took care of business. He's the one who made sure the contracts were the way they needed to be. But you can have a couple people like that in a band. But my argument is you can't have nobody. And if you have nobody, those are the bands that you might have heard about very briefly for a couple of years. They had a hit or two, and they're gone.
The one-hit wonders.
That you didn't have that cementing figure that it takes.
It's kind of like the parent figure for all the others because they can run around and do all these things, and you have that one that's totally responsible, and they look at that future of the band. The others, like you said, they're there, they're still performing, they're still very excellent at their craft, but they're not in it like they are.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a complicated form of order that Jerry Garcia required because some of us would say, no, there's no way Jerry Garcia required it. But he did have this picture in his mind that he insisted on everyone complying with, but it was still a pretty permissive thing.
Well, it's probably like his artwork. You have maybe he uses certain colors and there's certain lines or a look that he wants, but then it's still fluid, but he still has those requirements.
Well, that's an interesting analogy, but that may be true. Yeah. So I think that I think Jerry he didn't take care of his health at all, which is
sad.
Yeah,
especially with all the women in his life. The wives, the daughters. He had a lot of women in his life.
Yeah, but maybe they had the same proclivities, I'm afraid he didn't have around him the right people. Yeah. But he did manage to keep the Grateful Dead going strong. And now there's an interesting comment is that the Grateful Dead have continued afterwards. It's called Dead and Company. I think for legal reasons they've assumed a different configuration and names. But obviously somebody is assuring that happens. Probably Bob Weir. Bob Weir, I think, had a lot of good attributes in terms of helping the band stay together. Another thing that's impressive about Grateful Dead is just the fact that several of the members hung in there so long. Yeah. Pigpen, who had been in there originally, I think he was a drummer. He died early on, but he's only not there because he died, and.
He would still be there if he was still around.
And so there was a lot of continuity with that band, much more than there has been with many other bands.
Mm-hmm. You want to talk about enduring success. So for the viewers, our studio is located right next to a large concert venue. And I have never seen so many cars lined up when I was leaving work one day as a Dead and Company show. The cars were just coming constantly. There were people everywhere.
Now, and was John Mayer traveled with them, didn't he?
Correct.
Yeah. So no, and you can imagine, and incidentally, that the Grateful Dead performed there at that facility, and you talk about people lining up. People would come days ahead. So what you see now is just a fraction
Yeah.
of what existed when it was the Grateful Dead.
Yeah, there was like a show outside of the show.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah, people lining up. It's like tailgating.
So there's no doubt that this was largely due, not entirely, of course, but when you think of this phenomenon called Grateful Dead, whether you approve of it or not, you have to acknowledge, though, that Jerry Garcia, far more than any single figure, is responsible for that. I mean, he was the persona, he was the face, and he was very self-effacing. I remember in an interview once, in a Rolling Stone interview, they asked him, well, how did you become, the speaker for the band, or why is it that you're the person doing this? He said, people were coming around the early days, reporters asking questions, and he said that I had answers. And then a few minutes later, he said, my answers were no better than anybody else's. He said, I didn't say they were correct. He said, I just had answers.
Yeah, he's the one they went to because he would say something. Maybe the others were a little, shyer.
He was funny and charming, and he had no sense of pride that you sense that he's protecting.
No filter kind of thing,
yeah,
too.
Yeah, right.
Like, whatever.
He wasn't filtered, and so he was just a charming, likable guy. Even though he did have this demeanor that I think was essential to the success of that band, but he also had this other aspect which was as important for the band's success. Let's talk about his marriages and kids.
His personal life. Well, his first marriage lasted 4 years. His first wife is Sarah, and like I said, they were married for 4 years, and they had one daughter together. So that was Heather Garcia, his first daughter. She's now 62 years old. So she was born back in 1963. And then that, like I said, 4 years with that marriage ended in 67. And then he didn't get married again. His second wife, Carolyn Mountain Girl Adams, they got married in 1981. So there's quite a gap of time there, 67 to 81. And then he got married again. And of that marriage, they had two daughters together, Annabelle Walker Garcia and Teresa Adams Trixie Garcia. And that marriage lasted 13 years. That's the longest marriage he had of his 3 marriages. So then he moved on to that third wife, and that was like back-to-back marriages. So that second wife, they divorced, went their separate ways in 94, and then he got married in 94 as well, up until his death in 1995. So that was about a year with Deborah Coons, which was his third and final wife.
And just to make the point, because I think this is relevant to all the conflict that happened that we're about to get to, is it may look as if he, without knowing more, that he ran into her a year before he dies, marries her, and all of a sudden now she's in the position of the widow and the legal advantages that often gives the surviving spouse. When in reality they had known each other for a long time. They'd been together for a few years.
Yeah, they had dated back in the 70s, but they remained friends.
Yeah, so and that may mean they got together periodically. So it's not as if she's somebody who comes along at the last minute, inserts herself in his life, and then becomes a profiteer when he dies, which would be the characterization, I think, of other competing claims in his estate. So it does appear, though, that he maintained relationships with his daughters.
Yeah, with all his daughters. Even his other daughter, there was a fourth daughter, and that was out of a marriage. So they were not legally married. His youngest daughter, the fourth one, her name is Keelan Noel Garcia. And I think she was a bit of maybe an oopsie there. But she's now 38, so she was born in 1987, and he was actually still married to that second wife in 87. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So why don't we stop here And we'll do this in 2 segments. It won't surprise many of you who watch this show regularly that we often go to such an amount of time that we think, well, people aren't going to want to sit and watch the whole episode. So what we do is we break it into 2 pieces, and it's very amenable to that, because the first half we generally talk about the life, but we kind of set the stage for going into the discussion about end of life and estate planning. So we've just completed discussion of Jerry Garcia's life, most of it. Some of it we'll pick up with our next episode. But the main thing in the next episode is to talk about his death and then the issues relating to the estate thereafter. So we look forward to you joining us. This has been another episode of Life's Third Act. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed Life's Third Act, sponsored by Cordell & Cordell, your advisors for estate planning and beyond. Subscribe and join us weekly for thought-provoking discussion and topics exclusively focused on estate planning and your financial future. Discover more at CordellCordell.com. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.